It is already the winter when the mountains and rivers are bleak, and along the rolling Yangtze River that has been poetized by the Chinese nation, from Chongqing to Nanjing, I have completed the last journey of this roaming. After leaving the Three Gorges, facing the increasingly dense modern civilization on both sides of the strait, I knew that my journey was coming to an end. Everything in this year was just like the evening photo I watched silently at the stern of the boat with the wind in the river, from Jianghu slipping down on the wings. It silently hides behind thousands of blue waves and mountains, and as the night falls, it will turn into dots of stars and scatter in the heart of my memory. Yes, I am about to go back to the old life, but at this time I also deeply understand, it is difficult for people to leave certain familiar things, but it is also difficult to go back after leaving. I used to be so familiar with the prosperous modern civilization and the life of the mortal world, but now when I am about to step into it again, I feel that they are already so strange. I feel a kind of wordless sadness rising from the depths of my life. There is not only the infinite melancholy that the hero has come to an end, the glory is no longer, and the fields will never return, but also there is a feeling of not knowing where to go after thousands of years. The world is lonely. I once thought of staying in Nanjing and then riding, going to Kutla to see Confucius, and then going to my birthplace Jiazhu, Shandong, as the end of my journey, but at this time I feel that that is no longer the case. The important thing is just a form. I should go home. Just like what I said at the end of a later article, people must learn to go out, not to be a housekeeper, but also know to go home, not to be a prodigal son. At this time, I must learn to go home, go back to everyday society and life. On the afternoon when the ship arrived in Nanjing, the weather in Nanjing was extremely cold, with winter rain falling heavily. The streets with few pedestrians and the wet dead leaves all over the streets remind people of the vicissitudes of life in the city. As an ancient capital, here has not only the luxury of the six dynasties, but also the loneliness of Jinling King's popularity. Walking on her street, I felt relieved, and even laughed at myself. Just like those powerful dynasties in history would end in a hurry once they moved south, I chose Nanjing as the end of the whole journey, which is considered appropriate. The first thing I did when I entered Nanjing was to find my two good friends, Zhao Gang and Lan Fen, two poets, a man and a woman, who met when they traveled to the north together a few years ago. I found Zhao Gang's home in Dafang Lane, Drum Tower, and was about to call Lan Fen, who used to work in the TV station, when Zhao Gang said that she had stopped working without pay to do business. When a call was made to her home, her parents said she had gone to Beijing and did not know when she would return. I stayed at Zhao Gang's house. There are only two mothers and sons in his family. Zhao Gang has no job yet, and his old mother has retired. The couple live on pensions of only a few tens of dollars, and their lives are very poor. Later we went to see the poet Han Dong together. At that time, Sichuan poet Bai Hua was also applying to teach at Nanjing Agricultural College, and Shanghai poet Chen Dongdong also rushed to Nanjing 2 days later. So, a group of us, including Yu Zaiwai, a friend who writes novels, Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum together, went to Jiming Temple to drink tea, and spent the night at Han Dong's residence with wine. Then everyone went to Yangzhou to visit Slender West Lake, Jiwen, Pingshan Hall, and so on. It's a pity that Han Dong was unable to accompany him this time due to work. From left, Chen Dongdong, Bai Hua, Han Dong, Zhao Gang, Song Ci, Yu Zaiwai. Taken in Nanjing in the winter of 1989. After returning from Yangzhou, I planned to go to Hefei to see Zhang Baiyan, editor-in-chief of Poetry News. When it was over, I boarded the train to go home, but at this last moment, I was destitute in Nanjing. The travel expenses at home have not been sent for a long time, and I only had 200 yuan in my pocket when I set off from Chongqing. I eat instant noodles soaked in warm water and mustard in Fuling, and I don't need to spend a penny to eat and live at Zhao Gang's house after arriving in Nanjing. At this time, I am still penniless. And according to my calculations, the 5,000 yuan travel expenses I plan to spend at home in a year have also reached the point of exhaustion. More than 2 months ago, I received a letter from my wife, saying that in order to prepare some travel expenses for me, she got lost in the heavy rain in late autumn and fell ill after being sent home. I can only borrow money in Nanjing, and I need 500 yuan. But Zhao Gang's mother and son saw that they could only live frugally. Han Dong and Bai Hua were two bachelors, with a salary of 110 yuan a month. They were good enough to take care of themselves. They are very enthusiastic, but they are not familiar with them before, so naturally they don't want to open their mouths. The remaining Huashan Road can only wait for Lanfan. Zhao Gang was worried about me every day, and ran away with several of his children, hoping to borrow 110 yuan to let me go to Hefei first, but all of them fell through. We just sat in the cold hall of his house chatting or dazed. That day he was so bored that he took out a guitar to play and sing for me. When I saw a guitar, I suddenly thought of a person, Ding Xiang, the guitarist of the Nanjing Song and Dance Troupe. Yes, why not find Lilac? The year before my trip, he was invited to give guitar lessons to us, and he became very familiar with a group of our friends, as well as the young friend Kang Yi who accompanied me from Tibet to Dilingha, Qinghai. As soon as I entered Nanjing I just looked for him according to the address I left, but unfortunately the address was wrong, so I didn't have the chance to see him again. Zhao Gang played and sang with his guitar for a while, and then began to tell me a story with a touch of classic poignancy. He told me that this guitar originally belonged to Han Dong's wife, the poetess Zai Jun. After Zai Jun broke up with Han Dong, he didn't take the guitar away, but still stayed at home. When Han Dong sees the guitar, he often thinks of old things. So he asked Zhao Gang to take it home. Zhao Gang has always cherished it, not only cherishing a friendship, but also cherishing an old love for a friend. After speaking in this way, the songs he continued to play and sing became poignant, and even that afternoon became very poignant. The next day it was drizzling and the street was cold, so Zhao Gang accompanied me to the song and dance troupe to find Lilac. Before going out, he carried the guitar on his back, saying that he would take the opportunity to ask Ding Xiang for advice. When I arrived at the song and dance troupe, I found out that Ding Xiang was no longer in the troupe, and no one knew where she went. Once again our hopes were dashed, and the two of us walked back listlessly. When we came to a street, Zhao Gang suddenly asked me to wait for him and said to do something. I waited in the cold drizzle while he went into a house across the street and didn't come out for a while. I inadvertently glanced at the plaque on the door of the house, pawn shop. I immediately realized that something was wrong. I threw down the car and ran over in 3 steps. From the window, I saw Zhao Gang holding the guitar and arguing with a man. He was going to sell it, and he was bargaining there. I rushed in, snatched the guitar back, and left. Zhao Gang had no choice but to follow. How can you sell it? I said. For some money, you can go to Hefei. I'm not going anywhere. We went home in silence, and Zhao Gang played the guitar again, tears streaming down his face as he played. Perhaps it was Zhao Gang's sincere voice of friendship that moved God's will. Only 2 days later, Lan Fen, who had no faith at all, miraculously returned from Beijing. The joy was so great that the 3 of us went to a tavern and drank until midnight. Finally, Lan Fen proudly patted the 500 yuan into my hand. Is that enough, buddy? I smiled and patted her, and drank a big glass of beer. I arrived in Hefei the next afternoon and met Zhang Baiang in the editorial office of Poetry News. Just in time for the Poetry News to be ordered to republish. The atmosphere in the editorial office was hectic. After Zhang Baiang told me a lot, he also told me a touching story. A group of teenagers in the impoverished mountains of Hubei organized a literary club and contributed articles to Poetry News. In order to encourage this group of young literature lovers, the editorial department selected and distributed the poems of 2 young authors, which made the whole society very excited. With the unanimous consent of all the members of the literature club, each of them pooled a few or 10 yuan for travel expenses, and sent 3 representatives out of the mountains to visit the editors and teachers of Poetry News. But when they traded cars on foot, trains from cars, stayed at the station at night to save money, and bought the cheapest food to satisfy their hunger, when they finally came to the editorial office, they heard the news that Poetry News was ordered to suspend publication at that time. 3 teenage children cried on the spot. 2 days before I came, the children had already set off on their way back full of disappointment and sadness, and they didn't have time to hear the news that the editorial department had just received a notice to allow the change from a newspaper to a magazine called Poetry News Monthly. Zhang Baiang also told me that they are planning to turn the first issue of the reissue into a special issue for national experimental poetry groups like the 1986 China Modern Poetry Group exhibition, especially hoping that the editors had participated in the exhibition back then new works by some of the major groups. I, Zhu Lingbo, and Molly from Beijing participated in the exhibition in the Experience Poetry Group. Lingbo just sent 2 new poems to the editorial department not long ago, and Zhang Baiang asked me to keep 2 of them, and to add a purpose to the group of experience poems. The mistress of China stayed, and wrote a passage like this: I believe that poetry is a way of life, the cane of life. I believe that life is a way of experience, and there is no other purpose. Therefore, we open our lives and accept everything. Experience everything, and murmur into poetry. After finishing writing, he boarded the train and returned to Nanjing overnight. In the evening of the next day, Lan Feng heard that I was about to leave, so he asked me to go out alone. We came to a small bar with a warm atmosphere in front of Nanjing University of Foreign Languages. We sat in the corner and drank wine. She drank red and I drank white. There is a drizzle of misty music lingering in the room, and a chunky red candle is burning in the glass cup on the table in front of it, and the flame is shining very warmly. Besides the two of us, there were more than 10 foreign students in the cabin. They seemed to celebrate someone's birthday. Except for our seats, they gathered all the tables and chairs in the house together to form a rectangular platform. Men and women, white and black, sang, drank and had a good time, making the sound of music in the house become on and off. The atmosphere just matched our mood, lonely and quiet. Lan Feng was originally very beautiful, but she deliberately dressed up that night, making her look charming. In addition, a tramp with long beard and hair and dusty clothes like me drank silently with candles, which was a bit of a legendary and romantic atmosphere. We drank ecstasy in this atmosphere and sat all night. I found out at the checkout that each of us drank 38 cups that night, which I will never forget for the rest of my life. I packed my bags during the day, and Zhao Gang and Lan Feng sent me on the train home at dusk. The road is eternal. Life is eternal. Walking around Song CI/author, Oriental Publishing House. Serial number 73, Journey to the Yangtze River. Author resume. Song CI was born in Mission City, Heilongjiang Province. His original surname is Zhao, the 33rd grandson of Song Taizhi Zhao Quangayan. In 1979, he was admitted to the Chinese department of Heilongjiang University. After graduation, he was assigned to Mutanjiang Daily as the editor of the literary supplement. He began to write poetry in middle school, and entered the group of campus poets and third-generation poets in China in the 1980s and 1990s. In 1989, he traveled the country alone by bicycle for a year. He is the author of a collection of travel culture essays, Walking Around, and selected song poems. In 1993, he was transferred to work in Zhuhai, Guangdong, and served as the deputy editor-in-chief of Pearl River Evening News and the secretary-general of Zhuhai Journalists Association. Recently, CNN reported that for the first time, images of large airships appeared in the desert area of northwest China. According to the images taken by the satellite imaging company in December 2022, an airship about 30 meters long stays near the center of the runway and has an airship garage about 274 meters. Although it is generally believed that the airship has lost its practical value, we cannot ignore its important value, reconnaissance and communication. Airships have special advantages over conventional aircraft. Due to the buoyancy effect and the difference in air density, the airship can hover in the air, which is suitable for staying in the air to guard and observe the scene. It can also be powered by solar panels, so it can perform tasks for a longer period of time. Airships are usually equipped with various intelligence and reconnaissance equipment such as radar and infrared. These facilities are the key to information warfare. The detection capabilities provided by large airships can form an information advantage, and airships can also rely on their unique capabilities to fly into the stratosphere, which is difficult for air defense missiles to deal with. In addition, airships are also of great value in battlefield communications. If an airship can stay at an altitude of 20 kilometers and carry powerful communication facilities, then its coverage reaches 1,400 kilometers. Therefore, in the battlefield, the airship has very important application value. The wheels of history keep rolling, and China is now developing into the world's second largest economy at a rapid pace, and has made great achievements. Especially in the field of science and technology, China has been at the forefront of the world. In the future, China will continue to innovate in the field of science and technology and contribute to the realization of peace and development. At present, the world is still facing a lot of unstable factors and regional conflicts. But we believe that the theme of the era of peace and development remains the same. China has been actively promoting the concept of a responsible major country, and successfully put forward the Belt and Road Initiative, which has enabled many countries along the route to become rich. At the same time, the concept of a community with a shared future for mankind has further promoted the cause of human peace to a higher level. Although there are still challenges in the world, none of these can hinder the progress of history. There is no doubt that China will continue to contribute wisdom and strength to mankind in the years to come and create a better future. A few days ago, Russia announced that it had successfully occupied Bakhmut. Although Ukraine did not respond positively, it is not difficult to see that Russia held the Commendation Conference with great fanfare. Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the longest battle has finally allowed Russia to win down the win. In fact, it has long been known that Ukraine is inferior to Russia in Bakhmut. Ukraine has long been besieged by Russia in the city center. Russia has advanced step by step, and street fighting broke out between the two sides many times. At that time, some experts pointed out that it was only a matter of time before Ukraine fell to Bakhmut, and it was the best policy for Ukraine to retreat early to preserve its vitality and improve its offensive and defensive capabilities in other regions. But Ukraine obviously doesn't think so, and is still struggling in Bakhmut, but it still can't stand it anymore. However, the end of the battle on Bakhmut's side does not mean that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has come to an end, and the battle between the two sides is still going on. The Russian army's sudden six-line attack on Russia can be said to have achieved a phased victory this time, but Russia's ultimate goal has still not been achieved, and this conflict is naturally not over yet. Recently, in just 24 hours, the Ukrainian army has received bad news one after another. According to Russian media reports, Russia suddenly launched a six-line offensive, and at the same time, it launched an offensive in Donetsk, Kharkov, Zaporozhye, Kupiansk, Bonusman, and Kherson launched an offensive in 6 directions. This offensive can be described as quite violent. The Russian army used high-precision weapons to accurately strike targets such as Ukrainian arsenals and armored vehicles, causing considerable losses to Ukraine. Ukraine also organized personnel to launch air strikes against Russia, but the Russian air defense system successfully intercepted multiple Ukrainian rockets, and also successfully shot down many Ukrainian drones. The Russian offensive is quite unexpected, and it is relatively rare to launch an attack from 6 directions at the same time. Zelensky is about to collapse. Some analysts believe that after the Russian army ended the battle at Bakhmut, more military forces can be invested in other areas, which means that the Russian army's offensive strength in other directions has also been reduced. Upgrade, and the attacks that Ukraine will face next will only become more and more intensive. However, Ukraine is not unprepared. Although Ukraine has repeatedly stated that it will launch a counterattack against Russia, it has been delayed because of insufficient weapons and other equipment. Recently, Ukraine has received a large amount of military assistance from the West, including F-16 fighters. But even if the F-16 fighter is sent to the battlefield, Russia is not helpless. Although this is the most advanced weapon that the West has provided Ukraine so far, after all, the F-16 fighter is not a new model, and Russia naturally has it. Countermeasures. We know martial arts practitioners pursue speed only, and the reason is very simple. When the speed reaches the extreme, no matter how powerful the opponent is, they will not be able to resist it. The battlefield is a place where every second counts. Fighting planes are fleeting, and there is no room for mothers-in-law. If you have an elite army in your hand but cannot reach the battlefield in time during the war, everything is empty talk. Therefore, it is necessary to insert the most powerful troops into the heart of the enemy like a sharp knife in the shortest possible time. When our country fought wars in ancient times, we paid attention to the victory of surprise soldiers. At that time, although there were not many soldiers in hand, as long as they could be used every time and the tactics were ingenious, it would have a miraculous effect, often winning by surprise. Take the United States as an example. Everyone must know their strength, especially their military strength, which is among the best in the world. In terms of troop transport capabilities, the United States has advantages that many countries cannot match. Because the United States has a large-scale transport aircraft, the United States is enough to defeat 99.99% of the opponents in the world in terms of the performance and scale of the transport aircraft. It is precisely by virtue of this strength that it has helped the U.S. military win many battles. In many wars, the U.S. military has relied on the power of transport aircraft to deploy elite troops to distant battlefields. The Gulf War should be the best proof. Airborne troops descended from the sky to the Iraqi battlefield, completely ignoring Iraq. From the several modern wars launched by the United States, it is not difficult to see that the position and role played by the military's transportation capabilities in future wars are beyond imagination. The national conditions of each country are different. For example, it is more difficult for our country to develop large-scale transport aircraft, but we have our own way of transporting troops, and it is no worse than the U.S. transport aircraft. After years of exploration and practice, we have found our own strategic method, which is to use railway transportation with Chinese characteristics and combine ocean transportation. So how strong is China's railway transportation capacity? According to reports from the media, China had previously organized a cross-sea transportation exercise of military railways and ferries, and this process happened to be photographed by a passing American satellite. The result also directly shocked the White House, because they discovered that it only took half an hour for the PLA to transport 100,000 PLA troops across the sea. This is much stronger than their transport aircraft. The United States said with emotion that if they hadn't used satellites to discover the strength of the People's Liberation Army, they might have to hide it from the whole world. A few days ago, a Chinese fishing boat was detained in Malaysia. Not long after the news came out, the American and British media began to hype it up, claiming that the boat was involved in illegal salvage, and took the opportunity to put pressure on China. Think of the former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad not long ago. The whole thing suddenly became subtle when he named and criticized the United States. Screenshot of Reuters report. Chinese fishing boat seized, adding fuel to the fire. According to the Associated Press report, not long ago, the Malaysian government seized a Chinese fishing boat registered in Fuzhou, China, carrying 32 crew members, because it failed to show an anchor permit during routine inspections in Malaysian waters, and was in old shells and scrap metal from World War II were found on the ship, which was seized on suspicion of illegal salvage. Previously, 2 British warships sunk by the Japanese during World War II were found in the sea area, namely the Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse. In 1941, these 2 warships were sent to stop the Japanese landing on the Malay Peninsula. Instead of being successful, they were sunk by Japanese fighter planes, and 100 naval soldiers were killed as a result. The shells on the Chinese fishing boat are suspected to have been salvaged from the Prince of Wales. At present, this matter is still under investigation. Seized Chinese ships. However, before the Malaysian authorities came to a definite conclusion, the American and British media quickly began to hype. The British side first expressed condemnation, claiming that the salvage of the 2 British warships was a blasphemy to the wreckage of the Royal Navy. It goes on to say that these steels are very useful and can be used in the manufacture of scientific and medical equipment. Ship arrest is not the first time. The unilateral accusations made by the United States and Britain sound far-fetched. On the one hand, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse are both huge warships weighing 10,000 tons, and a small fishing boat simply cannot salvage them. On the one hand, these 2 ships have been sunk on the seabed for a long time, and no matter how good the steel of the hull is, it has been severely corroded, and it is meaningless even if they can be salvaged. Moreover, it is still unknown whether the old shells and scrap metal on the Chinese fishing boats are related to these 2 ships. Mahathir criticizes the US by name. Also, this is not the first time Malaysia has seized a Chinese vessel. Earlier, 6 Chinese fishing boats and more than 60 fishermen on board were detained by the Malaysian government. The official reason given was that the fishing boat failed to provide fishing license documents, which was very similar to the reason for this detention. Malaysia should be the clearest about whether there are tricks or not. Interestingly, not long ago, in an interview with the media, former Malaysian President Mahathir once stated, "We want to remain friendly to China, but the United States refuses to allow it." He also said that the United States has been putting pressure on other countries everywhere. The implication of confronting China and encircling China is that many of Malaysia's actions were made under pressure, not out of the heart. After this incident, the rapid response and joint hype of the United States and the United Kingdom seem to further illustrate one point: the arrest of the Chinese fishing boat is behind the United States. Winning ASEAN to encircle China is the top priority of the United States. It is no longer a day or 2 for the United States to intervene in ASEAN. In May last year, in order to win over ASEAN, the United States specially held a US-ASEAN summit in Washington. At the meeting, Biden announced that he would provide $150 million in aid to the 10 ASEAN countries. It is worth mentioning that during the same period, the United States gave Ukraine provided $40 billion in military aid. In addition, Harris, then the U.S. Vice President, also claimed that although the U.S. is not an ASEAN country, it will consciously assume responsibility and pass on the management of the affairs of Southeast Asian countries from generation to generation. It is worth noting that in every summit held between the United States and ASEAN, the South China Sea dispute is a key topic of concern to the United States. Although China is rarely mentioned publicly, anyone with a discerning eye can see that the reason why the United States attaches so much importance to ASEAN lies the purpose is to offset China's influence and contain China. US-ASEAN summit held in Washington. However, provocations by the United States are doomed to fail. For a long time, China and ASEAN have cooperated very closely. The two parties are each other's largest trading partners. A comprehensive strategic partnership has also been established. In addition, in terms of military affairs, this year China will also hold a peace and friendship joint military exercise with 5 ASEAN countries including Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. The military exercise began in 2014 and was initially a bilateral military exercise between China and Malaysia. However, as China's influence continues to expand, many ASEAN countries have joined in. It can be seen that the connection between China and ASEAN is in all aspects. Therefore, although there will still be some episodes under the pressure of the United States, the relationship between China and ASEAN will not produce too much fluctuation. In other words, instead of focusing on suppressing and enclosing China, it is better to care about its own domestic status quo and spend energy on solving its own political and economic shortcomings. This is the top priority that the United States should pay attention to.